Hello everyone, I'm delighted to welcome you to this video. I'm François Barthomeuf, I'm an astrologer, consultant and trainer. Behind me you can see Emmanuel Macron's chart, we'll be talking about it a lot. We will also look at Volodymyr Zelensky's chart, Vladimir Putin's chart, because some pretty incredible things are happening in their skies for the year 2026, which is going to be an absolutely crucial year. And of course, what is unfolding in their skies will inevitably have an impact on us. I would say the ordinary French people, the ordinary Europeans, the ordinary people of the world. And so we are going to conduct an investigation together, an investigation to see what is happening in their skies and how we too can respond to what is happening. So before we begin, I would like to give a reminder. I'm going to talk to you about the function of viruses. You know that astrology is a natural science. It observes nature. It's an empirical science that observes nature. And in nature there are different organisms, including viruses. So how does a virus work? A virus will start by targeting another organism, generally an organism that is basically healthy, or at least one that has a certain potential. Why? Because the virus feeds on this organism, so it needs an organism that is well-fleshed, well-nourished, so that it can feed off this organism for as long as possible. It will take advantage of a temporary weakness in the organism to infiltrate, to enter this organism and take control of it. Once it's inside this organism, let's call this organism a fruit to really illustrate the flesh of the fruit. And then the virus is like the little worm that gets in. It takes advantage of the fruit's weakness to enter and start eating it from the inside. So in astrology, viruses are represented by the planet Pluto, which is the planet of Scorpio. Why? Because the way a virus operates is associated with this planet of Scorpio, with Pluto. Pluto, which therefore represents the exercise of power. So you see, the virus will first enter the organism into the fruit. It will take control. It will seize power over this organism. And then it will gradually destroy this organism from the inside. And that is truly a Plutonian action. You know, Pluto is associated with death, with the principle of death. And so it's about taking power. So P, a lot of words associated with Pluto start with P. So I take control of an organism and then I will lead it to death by feeding on all its potential. Do you see the principle? And so after a significant period of time, every single virus in nature inevitably faces a profound dilemma at some critical juncture. That is, the virus will contemplate, either I continue to remain within this particular organism, but since I'm actively destroying it, this organism is progressively dying, and consequently, if I persist in staying within this organism as a virus, I will undoubtedly perish along with the very organism I am consuming and ultimately destroying. Or else, well, I must undergo a crucial internal mutation. I will endeavor to transform myself in such a way so I can effectively escape from this rapidly dying organism and then move on to successfully colonize a brand new organism. And if I manage to do that, I will be able to continue my life, my survival as a virus, and also continue my work of death and destruction elsewhere. But the goal, the DNA of the virus is always to survive. So you see, at a certain point we are confronted, the virus is confronted with this kind of dilemma. So why am I telling you about this? Because today, Plutonian principles are fully at play in our world. That is to say, the notion of power, of internal destruction, and of mutation in order to continue surviving is becoming more and more relevant throughout the world. So what we are truly witnessing, just take a moment to step back and clearly see it confirmed, and it is indeed very important to take that crucial step back. So what we are profoundly witnessing is the systematic destruction of our sovereign states, especially our cherished European states, by a particular kind of powerful supranational political caste that has over time gradually and insidiously taken complete control of our respective countries. And once they have acquired this significant power, well, they invariably become prominent leaders. They become what are often called presidents. Why do I specifically say so-called? Because indeed they were duly elected as presidents, as chancellors, or you could even say prime ministers, whatever official title you personally prefer to use. But in reality, they are legally presidents or prime ministers or chancellors, but they are not legitimate since they are now completely at odds with the people who realize that in fact something is destroying them from within. So there is a conflict between the fruit, which tries to defend itself with its immune system against this virus, but it can't manage because it realizes it too late. That is, the fruit realizes too late that it has been colonized and thus destroyed, eaten from the inside by this virus. So now, even when it calls on its immune system, this immune system has a very hard time fighting against this virus because it was caught too late. And that is also characteristic of Pluto, to take control of things in a sneaky, disguised way. That is to say, we always expect to find dictatorships coming from the outside, with those stereotypical mustachioed dictators in imposing uniforms who come and forcefully take complete control of a country by sheer military might and overwhelming force. But that, in essence, is the Martian version of taking control, a truly alien concept. However, the Plutonian version is completely different. Pluto always moves in disguise. You know that Pluto was Hades in Greek mythology. He wore a mask made of dog skin so that the other gods couldn't see him. It was a mask that made him invisible. So how does a Plutonian tyranny take hold? Never by force at the outset. It always takes hold through underground action, through sneaky, disguised, masked means that the victim doesn't see coming. You see? And so, that's what's happening now. Once the virus feels strong enough inside, the host recognizes it as a tyranny. But it's too late. And then the virus says, well, yes, of course I'm a virus. Of course I'm eating you from the inside. But it's too late now, you're dying. And so my question is, do I keep eating you or do I try to mutate to find another organism to colonize? Do you see the idea? So that's where we are. The principle of death has been mentioned, and I'm bringing it up here as well because Donald Trump used very strong words at the UN. He said, your countries, speaking about the European countries, are dying. There you go, your countries are dying. So he used the word death, if you will, the Plutonian word for death. And that's something you can actually see when you're on the outside. So he has no particular interest financially, I would say, in saying your countries are dying. No, he just says that because he can, because he's on the outside. It's harder when you're on the inside to tell yourself that you're dying, because in fact you don't believe it. You don't believe it. We were born, for example, in France, in Europe, with stable countries. There was no war. There was always a kind of growth. So we can't manage to think that way. To question the fact that yes, it's possible we can die, and actually yes, we are dying. That's inconceivable to us. But someone who is outside of these countries, who looks at what's happening in Europe, they might say, hey, be careful, your countries, they're dying. You see? So we find this idea of death, they are dying. So there are different ways. Death affects countries in different ways. But of course, economically, France is in debt to the tune of 3,400 billion. Its credibility rating in the financial markets continues to deteriorate. The debt increases by 5,000 euros every second. 5,000 euros per second. You see, since the beginning of this video, I think we've already added more than 500,000 euros to France's debt. Of course, this is irreversible. We've boarded a train. A train whose speed is no longer under control, and there's a curve ahead. We know we're going to derail in that curve because even if we slam on all the brakes right now, it won't be possible to turn things around. We're not going to find growth again, and we're not going to pay off this debt. It's impossible. When you look at the debt clock ticking away, you can see it's just running out of control. And it's absolutely impossible to stop this machine that's barreling ahead at full speed. So the train is going to derail. But it's also going to derail socially. So at the level of the population, in terms of justice, and especially in everything related to education, as well as in healthcare. So the country is dying, European countries are dying. Look at what's happening in Great Britain, look at what's happening in the Netherlands, look at what's happening in France. So our countries are dying and we need to be aware of it. Alright, so in this video we're actually going to conduct an investigation, and sometimes we'll put ourselves in the place of the virus to see if I were in the virus's shoes, what would I do to keep surviving? It's always good to put yourself, in quotes, in the enemy's place to see and try to anticipate their actions. And of course, we'll also stay in our own shoes to see how we can respond to that. There you go. It's a long introduction, but I wanted to explain this to you clearly beforehand, so it would be clear for you. Are you ready? All right, let's take a look at Emmanuel Macron's chart. You'll see just how much what I explained to you comes into play, especially the idea of Pluto. So Emmanuel Macron, this is his birth chart. Very well, you can see that he's a Sagittarius. Here, he also has a Capricorn rising. Perfect, if I may say so. What do we have that's characteristic? What's characteristic here is Pluto passing over his ascendant. It's been a while now. Pluto has been passing over his ascendant for already 2 or 3 years. We have a president with Capricorn rising, which means control, but here it's a Plutonian president. He truly embodies the Plutonian function. Everything I explained to you earlier about how a virus works, I'm not saying, please understand me, I'm not saying that Emmanuel Macron is a virus as a person. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that his role, his function as president in relation to France, well, he necessarily has a Plutonian influence. Currently, he has a strong Plutonian influence throughout his life, but it just so happens that he's the president of France, if you will. So his Plutonian influence also shows in his relationship with France and with the French people. So a seizure of power, but also the complete destruction of the entire French state. Okay, it's very rare to have a president with Pluto here, meaning someone who embodies and centralizes power to the point of excess. That's actually quite rare, and it's particularly dangerous. We see proof of that every day, I would say. So what's happening in his chart right now? Because that's what interests us. If you like, what's happening is that we have... So you see, this is his birth chart, but there's a second ring here of green-colored planets. There you go. This second ring here represents the transits of the planets currently in the sky. Right now it's early October 2025, so the planets are here in the sky at the moment. And so there is currently a celestial conjunction between Saturn and Neptune here, which is happening at the end of Pisces and the beginning of Aries. You see? So that's true for everyone. That is, everyone, we all have in the sky today a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I've talked about this a lot in other videos, so I won't go over it again. Just look at what's happening. This Saturn-Neptune conjunction is currently in a square, that's right, in a square to his Sun. You see? And to his Sun, Mercury. Well, so what does this tell us about Emmanuel Macron's chart? These are difficult transits. They started in May 2025 and will continue until March 2026. May 2025, March 2026. And these are difficult transits. So we can see that Emmanuel Macron, as president, is currently weakened because he has this double square from Saturn and Neptune. So Neptune is affecting Mercury and the Sun. Well, that's not very good. It gives him bad ideas, bad intuitions. He no longer has the right intuition. And so the decisions he makes are systematically bad and challenged. And that's exactly what we've been witnessing since the dissolution. But then the sequence of events, all the prime ministers he's tried to appoint, and all of these decisions, it's clear that there is no support, and it only makes his situation worse, his own situation, but also, of course, the situation of France. And then Saturn here in a square aspect to his Sun and Mercury, these are oppositions. So just as he had good fortune, as they say, luck, in the previous months and years, now it's much more difficult for him. He faces strong opposition that prevents him from acting as he would like. So we can see that if we take a step back, do the same, take a step to the side, look at it, then we say, well, yes, it's true, this is a very difficult period for him. We're not going to feel sorry for him, but it's very difficult for him right now. However, if we look very closely and with careful observation, the significant and harmonious planetary alignment of Saturn-Neptune also forms, let me change pens to clearly illustrate this point to show you, also forms a precise and influential trine here to his midheaven. And that's actually pretty good. That's rather good. That's actually quite nice. So why is that? What does that mean? It means that his midheaven represents his status. So that's his role as president. It's his presidential function. Well, Saturn in trine to the MC here, it's mainly Saturn at play here, brings a kind of continuity. So in a way, it protects him. It protects him in his position. It protects him, it reinforces him in his status as president. So this is a form of protection. So this is a form of difficulty. And this is a form of protection. How do we interpret that? We interpret it as meaning that on a daily basis it's very hard for him. He can't move. He has no room to maneuver. Saturn blocks the will of his sun, restricts the will of his sun. It even restricts Saturn, Mercury, his ability to express himself. You may have noticed that he no longer meets with the French people at all. He could no longer leave his bunker at the Élysée. So now it's no longer possible because there's too much disagreement between him and his people. So he can't speak anymore, he can't move anymore, and he can't exercise his will anymore. But even so, well, Saturn trine midheaven will help him stay in place in his presidential role. And this until March 2026, okay, all right. So what is going to happen in March 2026? Well, I would like you to look at this with me. You see these two little planets here, the sun and the moon? In astrology, this is what we call the progressed lunation cycle. So here you have the progressed sun, and here you have the progressed moon. You can see they are very close, which means that the moon here is about to join the progressed sun. And so this is going to happen. It only happens once every 29.5 years. The progressed lunation cycle, these are cycles. It's a cycle of 29.5 years. Well, this conjunction is going to occur in March 2026. Look, in March 2026, that's exactly when these transits will come to an end. So when this difficulty, and at the same time he's holding on to his position, comes to an end. Well, in March 2026, there will be a progressed moon-progressed sun conjunction. So a progressed new moon phase, which happens once every 29.5 years. Well, in Emmanuel Macron's chart, this represents a major life change, a major shift in his life cycle. And having done thousands of consultations, I can tell you that it's always significant. It indicates a shift into something else. So, as you can see, there are really several clues pointing in the same direction. Transits coming to an end, and at the same time, a change in life cycle. You see? So that's for March 2026. There you go. Okay, so at the same time, you also have, and this is something you really need to pay attention to, Uranus. You see the planet of Aquarius, which is currently passing over its IC, Imum Coeli, or the bottom of the sky. So that's happening right now. And here as well, it will end in April 2026. So Uranus represents change, renewal, instability. And here it's settling on his IC. And his IC represents his roots. So for a head of state, that's his legitimacy. Where do I draw my strength, my legitimacy from? It's also the connection to the homeland. So here to the country, to France, and by extension to the French people. So here there's change, a renewal that's being prepared. Why do I say that it's in the process of being prepared? Because we can clearly see that Saturn and Neptune are blocking his sun anyway and keeping him in his position. So Uranus on the IC, yes, that's happening right now, but this transit can't be fully expressed. It can't be expressed because it's blocked by Saturn in this configuration. Do you understand? On the other hand, starting in March, when those transits disappear, Uranus on his IC will be able to fully play its role, maybe for a fairly short period. But in the spring of 2026, we will really have Uranus on the IC in Emmanuel Macron's chart, which will be able to break free. What could that lead to? A change in his relationship with the people, a change in his place of residence, in his lifestyle, which will therefore coincide with a major life change since he will be entering a new life cycle. We should also keep in mind that Uranus on the IC is opposite the midheaven. So it could also mean a change in his status as president that could, boom, get unstuck, change then. In the spring of 2026, especially between March, April, maybe May, well, during that period, you see? Okay. So it's still Emmanuel Macron's chart we're talking about, right? And here, I've summarized what's happening. So here you have the year 2026, see, 2026, okay? What do we have? We have the challenging transits, Saturn square Sun, Neptune square Sun, and you can see that it's going to stop. In February, so almost in March, at the end of February, so basically March 2026, you also see Saturn trine mid-heaven, so it will remain in position up to this point. But here, in March 2026, there's a major change, a progressed new moon. Progressed new moon, so a change of life cycle. All right, end of these transits, and Uranus at the bottom of the sky. Boom, at that point there could be a major change in his relationship with the people, maybe his place of residence and so on. So how can we interpret this? I would say that one of the scenarios, because everything we've just seen here is part of a much broader configuration, which I discussed in a previous video, you'll find it easily. Regarding 1789 and 2026, there is a repetition of the planetary configuration from 1789 in 2026. So 1789 was obviously a year of revolt, of revolution, and 2026 will echo that revolution of 1789. Why? Because Pluto will be in the sign of Aquarius and it will be opposite Jupiter in the sign of Leo. So it's the overthrow of a global power, a monarchical power. And so today, potentially of a supranational power, Jupiter, well then, the reading of this scenario could be that things will become more and more difficult for Emmanuel Macron, increasingly difficult. He will remain in place until March, but starting in March, there could be a popular uprising. And so that would push Emmanuel Macron into something else. That is to say, he would be ejected. So it would be the people, the fruit, who through their immune system overthrow, eject, expel the Plutonian virus and send it out of France. Sending him out of France, which could be explained here, with Uranus at the bottom of his chart. These are transits that we often see, for example, during periods of moving house for individuals. For a private client, if you have Uranus at the bottom of your chart, it can manifest as, boom, a potential move. That is to say, a change in domestic life, in habits, in place and way of living. You see Uranus at the bottom of the chart. So in this case, well, here we have an increasingly difficult situation for Emmanuel Macron. His legitimacy is going to be challenged. And here, or rather his lack of legitimacy, and here there is a revolt of the people starting in April, which expels him, sends him away, it's over. He leaves, he goes into exile, he's gone. He can no longer stay in France. That is entirely possible with this kind of configuration. Alright, so let's say that's the scenario, I would say, where the immune system of the fruit is stronger than the virus. And that's entirely possible. I hope it happens that way, so that France and the European countries can gradually regain their sovereignty and start rebuilding themselves. But if that's not the case, then if that's not the case, now let's put ourselves in the place of the virus itself. In the place of the virus, this is what you have. What do you say to yourself? You say, it's complicated, I'm going to keep a low profile, I'm going to keep a low profile, I'll try to hold on, I'll try to survive as best I can by keeping a low profile until March or April 2026. So I'm not going to dwell on domestic political issues because that's very sensitive, it's explosive. Instead, I'm going to focus on the outside. I'm going to do geopolitics. I'm going to save Palestine. I'm going to save Europe from the evil Pluto. I'm going to do things like that. But I'm not going to stay in France because I know that in France I'm in trouble because of Saturn square Mars square Sun. And then starting in the spring, in March, April, that's when I'll be able to get back on my feet, if you will. You see? I'll be able to get back on my feet. I'm going to change a lot of things in my relationship with France, with the French people, etc. And so when Saturn Sun stops, I'll regain energy, the ability to act. And at that point, it could be very painful. Because if I take back this power, how could it manifest? For example, if we look at Article 16, now I'm not saying this is necessarily going to happen. I'm saying, since there's this hypothesis that Emmanuel Macron could invoke Article 16, Article 16 in the French Constitution is an article that allows the president to grant himself full powers. Not for a set period of time, by the way, it's unlimited, but to deal with a crisis situation. So if I were Emmanuel Macron, I would say I'll keep a low profile until March or April, and then at that point I regain the ability to act, and potentially here I activate Article 16 to transform my relationship with the people to truly embody Pluto, to say, now obviously I am a tyranny, I am an autocracy, of course, and at that moment I seize power with both hands. If that's the case, it would be in the spring between March and April. So why am I saying this? Because look at what's coming next. Now, these are transits, so they are always trends. Be careful, these are not predictions. I'm not making predictions, I'm making forecasts based on planetary transits. So these are trends. What exactly happens next? Let's carefully look at Emmanuel Macron's astrological chart. Once he has significantly changed his personal status, once he has fully regained his inherent strength and vitality, from that precise point on, we clearly see the powerful astrological aspect of Saturn trine Mars. So here, there's action again, determination, a plan, potentially something quite martial, combative, with Mars involved. And above all, look, Jupiter is going to pass over his natal Mars. Here, this will be it. It will start from the month of May. So you see there's a rebound starting in May, and from August, Jupiter conjunct Mars. So Jupiter will bring its amplifying factor here. It's going to intensify something, and here, what is it going to intensify? It will intensify the Martian action, so the combative, warlike side of Emmanuel Macron. So, if he regains strength, I would say in the spring of 2026, after that you potentially have here a Martian type action like conflict or war that could take shape, especially starting in the summer between July and August 2026. So from there, once we've seen that, we understand when it is that the people need to act. And if they don't act, here's the risk. After that, there's potentially the risk of a war, of a conflict. So now we need to look at what Volodymyr Zelensky's chart says, as well as Vladimir Putin's chart, to see if there are any clues that overlap regarding this. That's what I suggest we do in the second part of this video. Thank you very much for your attention. See you in a moment. Well, here you are back. I hope all those transits weren't too hard to digest. Anyway, you should remember the main points of what I just explained to you. And now, in this second part, we're going to take a look. Thank you again for your attention. In this second part, we're going to look at Volodymyr Zelensky's chart, still investigating and exploring the possibilities of what might happen starting this spring. Okay? Let's look at the chart. Let's go. So here's the chart of Volodymyr Zelensky. So Volodymyr Zelensky is an Aquarius. As you can see, he has his sun in the sign of Aquarius, and he's also a Gemini rising here, rising in the sign of Gemini. He's a Capricorn Mercury as well. All right, very good. I don't know if you can see it, but actually there are a lot of similarities between, well, there are certain similarities at least, between Volodymyr Zelensky's chart and Emmanuel Macron's chart. Why? First of all, because they're people from the same generation. That is to say, you have to realize they were born practically a month apart. Emmanuel Macron was born on December 21st, 1977. Volodymyr Zelensky was born on January 25th, 1978. So there's just a month's difference between them. So they really are two people from the same generation. At the time I'm speaking to you, they are 47 years and 8 and 9 months old. So they're really two people who were born almost at the same time, astrologically speaking. And so, as a result, we're going to find certain similarities. But there are also things that can be explained differently. Look, actually, at the similarities. So before I talk to you about the similarities, look, we can look here in Zelensky's chart. We look at Mars. You see this sequence here, Mars, Moon, Moon at the bottom of the sky. Saturn here. So Mars is, I would say, almost make a symbolic reading of the sequence of these three planets. So you have Mars here, which represents the fight. You have the moon at the bottom of the sky, which represents the homeland, so the people, in this case, his people here, so Ukraine. Ukraine is the Ukrainian people, represented by the moon at the bottom of the sky. So at a certain point, this Mars is going to meet the moon at the bottom of the sky. So it's a fight for Ukraine, a fight for the Ukrainian people. And then if we extend it further, we arrive at Saturn, and that's much less favorable. Saturn, in relation to Mars, represents the idea of a fall, a collapse of something. So first, it's a fight that will be fought for Ukraine, but behind that, be careful, there's the idea of something falling apart. Potentially himself, a removal from office. It's the same, he's a president currently, legally elected, in a crisis situation whose term has been self-extended since there haven't been elections for several years in Ukraine under the pretext of the conflict. So he's a president, I don't know if we can... He's on the edge of legality today. In any case, he no longer has legitimacy. Would the Ukrainian people vote for Volodymyr Zelensky today? But we have no idea and we'll never know. Because, of course, elections will not be held. And why won't they be held? Can you imagine? It's war. We're not going to hold elections in the middle of a war. Of course, it's already happened in history. There have often been elections held during wartime. But today, these are people who don't want that because they're trying to hold on to their position of power and control over the states. That doesn't take away from the fact that there is indeed a fight for Ukraine and a fight for the Ukrainian people. That doesn't change. I'm talking to you about something very specific here. Does Volodymyr Zelensky still have legitimacy as the Ukrainian president? That's the question today. Or rather, or at least it should be asked. But it's not being asked because those in power are forbidding elections. I wanted to show you that, in fact, there are a lot of similarities on this point. You see? Because Emmanuel Macron, he has his own influence. So in the end, between Zelensky and Macron, Emmanuel Macron has his ascendant at the end of Capricorn, and you can see that, in fact, while for Emmanuel Macron, Pluto has already crossed his ascendant here, well, Pluto is currently crossing over the Sun. It's about to cross over Zelensky's Sun. And also you have Mars here, and Jupiter is about to cross over Mars. So let's take a quick look at a comparison of their charts so you can clearly see what I'm talking about. Here you have Zelensky's chart, and here you have Macron's chart. Now look at Pluto here, which is crossing over the Sun, about to cross over Zelensky's Sun, and Pluto, which is already crossing over Emmanuel Macron's ascendant. And also look again at what we saw earlier. That is, Jupiter here was about to cross, remember, over Emmanuel Macron's Mars. Do you remember that? That was the warrior action. Well, now look, Jupiter here is also about to cross over Mars. So in fact, we have a kind of repetition here, since Pluto is crossing Emmanuel Macron's ascendant, and it will cross Zelensky's Sun, and Jupiter is going to cross over Emmanuel Macron's Mars, and Jupiter will also cross over Zelensky's Mars. So when an astrologer like myself sees this in the investigation we're conducting, well, you think to yourself that there's something very warlike here, with the embodiment of a power that's being put into place. So the key moment is when Jupiter crosses over Mars there. Now, for Zelensky, Pluto will cross over his Sun starting in March. Look, starting from March 2026, Pluto will cross over his Sun, you see? So here there will be a coming together between Zelensky and Pluto, in the sense that both of them will embody Pluto very strongly. And then, when Pluto passes over the Sun, there is a kind of concentration of power. You can feel all-powerful. The will to destroy is very strong, precisely because of an excess of concentrated power. And with Pluto on the Sun, the willpower, you can go all the way and even beyond the limit. There are no more limits with Pluto on the Sun. It's a form of extremism, just like Pluto on the ascendant as well. So this starts from the month of March. You can see that there is a correspondence here. In March, we saw that there were a lot of things in Emmanuel Macron's charts. From that point on, he could either be swept aside and expelled from France by a revolt, or he could start to recover and then act in a Martian way. So this is not insignificant. And then look, Jupiter will pass over Zelensky's Mars starting in the summer, in July 2026. In July, 2026, Volodymyr Zelensky will experience Jupiter conjunct Mars. Whereas in Emmanuel Macron's chart, this Jupiter conjunct Mars happens starting in August. So, I don't know if you see what that means. That is to say, the two leaders who are perhaps the most hawkish today. So in Europe, Zelensky and Macron will both find themselves with Jupiter conjunct Mars, the intensification of war or combative warlike action starting in July and from August 2026. Well, that's not very good. So it's not very good, I would say, for the people. Because here, it means that if we don't eject Emmanuel Macron by the end of spring, then in the summer, there really is, in their respective charts here, a risk of warlike action, that is to actually provoke a war. More than just a conflict, truly a war, to bring Europe and NATO into war, to erase everything they've done up until now, to erase the traces of the virus they've been in, weakening their respective countries, in the destruction of their countries. That would be entirely possible. Okay, well, so now I suggest that we look at the third party involved in this issue, which is Vladimir Putin's chart, to see if we can find in Vladimir Putin's chart any elements that might corroborate this. So here is Vladimir Putin's chart. You can see that he's a Libra with Scorpio rising, and you can also see that he has Pluto here. You see Pluto at the midheaven. Well, so I've already analyzed Vladimir Putin's chart. I refer you to that video if you want to know more. Here again, we clearly see the concentration of power, if you will, with Pluto at the midheaven. In fact, a nuclear power. You know that Pluto is also associated with everything nuclear. So everything nuclear, there are nuclear power plants in Ukraine, but also, and perhaps especially in France. France is a nuclear country, and of course, Russia is a nuclear country as well. So we also find this here through Pluto, that is the threat of using nuclear power. I hope it will remain only a threat because it is still there potentially. What is happening in Vladimir Pluto's chart? That's what we need to look at. It's that Saturn, which is here, will continue its path and will come to oppose his Sun. It's an opposition. And this Saturn opposition will take place starting in July 2026. So, July 2026. So starting from July 2026, Vladimir Pluto will experience a Saturn-Sun opposition. That is to say, Saturn is precisely an opposition. It's something that comes to counter him. The Sun represents his will, what he wants. And on the other side, we find powerful enemies here with Saturn. Saturn in the sign of Aries. So, powerful enemies. Authorities who will try to oppose him, and potentially something rather aggressive in Saturn. And for Vladimir, Pluto, it's going to be difficult at that time. You remember that Macron currently has Saturn square Sun. So Saturn opposite Sun is difficult for a head of state. It's a difficult period. Well, how is it that this starts to take shape from July 2026? That is at the very moment when Emmanuel Macron and Volodymyr Zelensky will have Jupiter on their natal Mars, meaning they'll be more Martian than ever. You see? Isn't there a correlation? Well, it's possible. And that would really be a risk actually here. The risk that indeed that Pluto could be put in difficulty by an attack or by entering into war, the potential of NATO and Europe. And then after that, starting in October, Jupiter will move on. So you know that Jupiter had passed over Mars, Emmanuel Macron's Mars, Volodymyr Zelensky's Mars. And now look, Jupiter will continue its path and will come into conjunction at the midheaven, and therefore with Vladimir Putin's Pluto, and that's from October 2026. There you have it, red October. So starting in October, Jupiter will also reach his midheaven. And so, do you see, there's a slight shift. That is, we first see an intensification of the Mars of Volodymyr Zelensky and Macron during the summer, between July and August. And in response to that, starting in July, we see difficulties arising in Vladimir Putin's chart. And from October onward, we have Jupiter on the midheaven, which could bring out the worst and the best. The worst and the best. The best would be I immediately stop these completely. It's madness. So as a precaution, I stop. Through nuclear deterrence, you stop your nonsense, kids. Playtime is over. I'm not from the same generation as you. You have to realize that Vladimir Putin is still from a different generation. He is 20 years older, so it's not the same generation. So I'm stopping you right now. Pluton, nuclear threat, you stop your nonsense, kids. Or else, well, it goes beyond that, and in that case, it would indeed be the possibility of a conflict, and a global conflict taking shape, starting from the summer, the beginning of summer, and which could escalate from October onward. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I'm absolutely not making predictions. I'm making forecasts based on the transits. So once again, these are trends, and it's important to be aware of them. Be aware of these trends because everything isn't set in stone, if you will. The European people, or rather the peoples of Europe, must seize the opportunity, in quotes, that they currently have of having leaders who are, after all, weakened. And we can see this in Emmanuel Macron's chart. All right? So Saturn square Sun, Mars, that's a weakening. He can't make a move until March. So it's absolutely necessary to take advantage of this period until March to push the advantage of the people to be able to oust, I would definitely say, the pervasive globalism virus and the urgent need to take back complete and sovereign control of our beloved country, starting at the end of the upcoming spring season. Because if that's not the case, we're going to give Emmanuel Macron, at least in France, the opportunity to recover starting from March or April and to launch a very aggressive action that could turn into a conflict. Starting from the end of spring, beginning of summer, and that is the worst case scenario. You see, actually, the sky up there offers several possible scenarios. It gives the peoples in the plural, the possibility to act and to choose, but only at certain moments. Right now, it's absolutely necessary for our European peoples to push things further, to seize the advantage, to capitalize on the difficulties faced by the current leaders in order to overthrow them in the spring, because otherwise the risk is war. So I also I wanted to look at the charts of other European leaders, benefactors of humanity. For example, you see, I even forget their names. That's how much. Keir Starmer. So, in Great Britain, and Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor in Germany. Now, it turns out that, well, we don't have their birth times. So, in any case, it's not reliable. So I can't really cross-check these predictions with their two charts. I don't get the impression. Now, you have to realize that Merz and Starmer, they're not from the same generation as Macron and Zelensky. So you see, there's a greater generational complicity that could occur between Macron and Zelensky rather than, for example, between Macron and Starmer or between Zelensky and Merz. It's not the same generation. And in the transits I have in relation to their planets, since I don't have their birth times, I don't have the houses, I don't have the ascendant, so I'm missing half the information. I don't get the sense that they will truly be war leaders, unlike Macron and Zelensky starting this summer. I don't see them in the same boat, if you will. I feel like they're going to face limitations coming from their own people that will really prevent them, maybe even oust them beforehand, but that will definitely stop them from going further in an offensive against Russia. On the other hand, for Macron and Zelensky, there really aren't any limits. There's no safety net, there's nothing to stop them. They could very well shift completely into a war phase by the end of the summer. That's it. That's what I wanted to show you. I know these aren't exactly cheerful news, but once again, it's important to focus on this. We have the potential to act. And when is that? It's now. That means we really need to act now, up until March 2026, in order to truly capitalize on an advantage. Macron is currently weakened. We need to take advantage of that. We need to put as many things in place as possible so we can turn the page starting in the spring. Otherwise, a different page might be turned, and that one could be written in red letters. That's the risk. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about in this video. Thank you very much for your attention. Don't hesitate to like this video if you enjoyed it, and also to subscribe to my channel. You also know that I offer, of course, consultations on my website, full consultations or targeted answers to specific questions. So don't hesitate. If you have a specific question that's been on your mind, order that question on my website. I'm also an astrology instructor, so I offer a complete training program. Whether you are a beginner or advanced, it doesn't matter. Actually, what I offer in my training isn't just another astrology course. It's more about teaching a method for interpreting the birth chart. And that's what you'll find on my website. I will be very happy to welcome you. There has been a major update with new videos, exercises, quizzes, and coaching through practical workshops. So don't hesitate. If you want to train in astrology, you're in the right place on my website or websites. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll see you in a few weeks for the next geopolitics video. Thank you very much. See you soon. Goodbye.